This is Anthony Nayagan. This is a series of videos I am doing on the concept of mindfulness in meditation. This is the second video on a series of videos on mindfulness in meditation. So last week we talked about how the intellectuals transformed the mysteries in the scriptures. And they did it for a purpose, and that purpose is to introduce morality among their followers. How did they do it? Well, they did it with identifying certain pain points in their lives and giving them answers to those solutions, how to cope with them or how to live around them or how to manage them. For instance, the pain points could be a karma, it could be the death, it could be a punishing God, it could be an eternal damnation. In the case of Christians, it could be a fear of unforgivable sin against the Holy Spirit. Then they go on to explain complexities of these fears and introduce dharma as a ways and means of managing these fears, managing these pain points, defining dualistic and polarized intellectual moralities into the religion and into the communities and societies among their followers. See, this morality is introduced by way of defining the opposite of dharma, which is adharma. I mean, if we take a look at the catechism of the church, we can quickly see they don't go into defining righteousness as much, but all of the moral theology is based on adharma, which is sin. Anyway, but the discussion of this series is not as much about adharma and dharma and sin and all of that, but it's about mindfulness. What is mindfulness has to do with spirituality. So today let's get into it. See, in Christianity, in Matthew 16:33 we read, Jesus says to Peter, "You do not have the mind that concerns God, but merely human concerns." But I have read in other versions and other languages that the same verse is written, "You don't have the mind of God, but human mind." Besides, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 16 says, "We have the mind of Christ." See, these verses contradict with human mindfulness in the process of comprehending the mysteries and the mysteries about and of God. Mysteries about the wisdom of God. But in Matthew 16:23, Jesus also contrasts the mind of God against the mind of a human. So, what is the mind of God? It is easy to communicate divine wisdom to an audience, not as intellectually sophisticated. It's very easy to teach God's wisdom to a child. the more someone advanced in education, the more they develop polarized and structured perceptions within themselves, ordered perceptions within themselves. For them, green is a well-defined color, deeply entrenched in their ordered perceptions. If I tell them, for instance, that leaves are not green but consist of variable shades of colors, they simply would not get it. In fact, there is no specific color as digital and polarized in any and all of God's creations. None of God's creations are alike. They are, in fact, unity in diversity. To appreciate and enjoy the creation in unity and diversity, it gets better and better as our mind unlearns our defined and ordered perception and stereotypes and transcend and rise towards the mind of God. However, it is also incredibly difficult since we practice intellectual religions and intellectual school of thoughts with a well-defined set of theories and doctrines. That is why Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." A spirit and intellect that is absolutely poor, meaning empty of all perceptions. See, the theory of mindfulness is based on at least 5,000 years old Indian philosophy and theology, in which mind over matter, in other words, how mind takes control of all material elements in our cosmic universe of consciousness for the betterment of all humanity. In this cosmic universe of consciousness is perceived as an enlightened mind that witnesses and perceives everything, even godliness. 2,500 years later, Buddha, the enlightened one, emerged. But in the Indian version of Buddhism, cosmic universe of consciousness is still perceived as mind over matter. However, when Buddhism spread into China, the Buddhist monks in China perceived something else in the teachings of Buddha, and that is formlessness. Thus emerged Zen Buddhism. See, let's talk about Zen and formlessness. Now, the reason why I bring other religions in our discussions, see, for someone who is spiritually enlightened, that person transcends religion. The divisiveness of the religion is not in his perceptions. He looks at all religions as another diversity that must be united. See, in Buddhism, there is a concept called Mount Meru. It's a mountain. It's a Mount Meru. On the top of the mountain, the mountain itself is a form, and above the mountain is formlessness. And that formlessness is described in the Buddhist scriptures as arupa dhatu. And then comes the form, which is the levels below, and that is a realm of form described as rupa dhatu. Rupa means something that is visible. Arupa is something that is invisible. So arupa dhatu, and Rupa Dhatu. Okay, in the Rupa Dhatu, the realm of desire, that is Kama Dhatu, desires. Kama means desire, which contains 6 domains, each with its own kinds of material beings, in other words. On the top of this mountain, on this echelon, are devas and gods. This is a mystical body of gods, but still bodies. And all the demigods and all of them, it goes in there. So on the top of that, there are still mystical bodies of gods, but they are not jealous gods and demigods. The jealous gods and demigods come at the second level. And below the second level, there is a third level that is for Manushya. Manushya actually means humans. So Manushyas is at the third level. Fourth levels are Tiryakas. Tiryaks is actually animals. The less intelligent beings is Tiryaks. In other words, animals, birds, all of them will come under Manushyas. Then comes the Petras. Petras is hungry ghosts. Again, they are material existence. Then comes Narakas, or demons, or Satans, the beings in the hell. The hell beings is at the lowest plane. Now, all of these are actually in Buddhist mythology and even in Hindu mythology, these are actually layers of conscious awareness which we need to transcend as human beings so that we can actually transcend from the narakas, meaning, our demonic dispositions, all the way into godliness by way of transcending these layers. So that is really what Hinduism and Buddhism and Zen, even Islam, they talk about the 7 layers of transcendence. The 6 layers, and the top of all of that is the formlessness of God. See, when we are in talking about Hinduism, they talk about the layers as chakras within human bodies, and on top of that is the Sahasra, and beyond that is godliness itself, the mind of God. When we transcend Sahasra is the 6th chakra. Beyond that is the 7th chakra, which is the pure consciousness itself. Now the same concept is there in Islam also. They say it is 7 layers of heaven. And don't mistake, it is there in Christianity as well. Ezekiel talks about 7 layers. Saint Teresa of Avila, a contemporary mystic, she has written extensively about the 7 layers of transcendence. Another mystic, it is a modern day mystic actually, his name is Thomas Merton. He has written a book about 7-story mountains. So this mountain actually, according to the Buddhism, is called Mount Meru, and above the peak is the Buddha fields, which is heavens. That's a formless field Buddha realized or become enlightened in. And on the upper slopes, as you go up the mountains, you see material entanglements, desires. Those are entities with desires, and they remain as entities because of their desires. That's what Buddhism teaches. So animals have desires, demons have desires, hungry ghosts have desires, Manushyas, which is people, of course, they have desires. Even asuras, the jealous gods and the demigods, they have desires. That's why they are still entangled in their material being. Then comes devas and gods who are still attached, to the materiality of the universe. And beyond that is the formlessness. Although Zen Buddhism started with the spiritual tradition of meditating on the formlessness, the people who inherited, they started interpreting it as something that is again came back to mind over matter. So the Zen Buddhism today is not about meditating on the formlessness. It is still about the form. In the Western school of Eastern spirituality, the cosmic universe of consciousness is still perceived as mind over matter. Form and mindfulness continue in all intellectual circles, even if it has to do with spirituality. The philosophy continues to center around how do we leverage mindfulness for the betterment of humanity. Ironically, the cosmic ocean of conscious energy remains a less understood phenomena in the Western school of Eastern spirituality of mindfulness. To understand why, let's shift focus and discuss the Bible. See, in John 5:19, Jesus says to his apostles, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing on his own, but what he sees the Father as doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise." Now, if we reflect on this relationship that Jesus and the Father in heaven had, it becomes quite evident in the readings of Genesis that Adam also lived a similar life before his fall. But the church had to define sin. So the fall of Adam became the source intelligence for the definition of sin. From there on, sin permeates pretty much all across the doctrines of the church. If we look beyond the fall of Adam as a sin, incredible enlightenment awaits us as to the incredible life Adam lived before his fall. We would learn many things about the life in God and the life in wisdom of God when we read Genesis before the fall of Adam. It's incredible. See, in the fall of Adam, let's look at Genesis 2:16 and 17, the commandment. The commandment reads, "You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." See, a straightforward interpretation of this one is, by way of eating that of the tree, the man gained the knowledge of good and evil, isn't it? So, good and evil actually means a knowledge of polarity. Knowledge based on opposites in an observation. We look at an observation as good or bad, positive or negative, right or wrong, good theory, bad theory, plus or minus, debit or credit, profit or loss, advantage, disadvantage, what's wrong, what's right. See, everything is polarized at the source observation, and from then on we build intellectual reasonings along the same guidelines of polarity. That's how we still think, that's how all of our ordered perceptions are built on. Every single school of intelligence is based on the knowledge of polarity, even to date. So that is the human intelligence. So, alright, by way of eating of that tree, we gained the knowledge of polarity. So what was the knowledge before? The knowledge of polarity man inherited. See, the fall of Adam is not limited to sin of disobedience to God's commandments. It also has to do with the knowledge and the choice of right and wrong, good and evil, the polarity-based knowledge. And such knowledge, according to God, will die, meaning such knowledge is mortal. So there are two mysteries that must be explored. One is the knowledge of polarity, and the second one is mortality as a consequence of the knowledge of good and evil. See, there is a reason why no civilizations that existed a few thousand years ago exist today. Even something as complex as civilization that is based on the knowledge, human knowledge, is mortal. No businesses that existed 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago still exist. They are mortals. No technology, nothing. Everything is mortal. See, the mind is a container of matter. Our perceptions are ordered matters. Our knowledge and mindfulness are ordered relativities of matters. So, what is immortality? See, immortality, it's kind of interesting. We are going to talk about immortality in the context of desire, as Buddhism says. Christianity doesn't say anything different either. I'll come to that. But according to Buddhism, the mortality is around desire and how we try so hard to introduce immortality into mortal elements and getting frustrated by our efforts. That is really what brings us unhappiness. So the human suffering is one of desires that is associated with the mortality of what we are likely to possess. See, our desire is always about establishing some sort of immortality into mortal elements, so the continuity of our desires remain. Our sufferings are due to the frustrations we encounter as we endeavor to establish this immortality and continuity of our desires. That is why Jesus, Buddha, the Hindu Vedantas, they talk so much about transcending the layers of various desires in our lives. See, before the fall, Adam had the mind of God. So what is the mind of God? What is it like? The Bible says very specifically, it is a formless void. Genesis beginning of Genesis, it's a formless void. That's the mind of God. Buddhism says it is the highest realm of formlessness, arupa dhatu. In Vedanta, it's Dvaita. It is the oneness of being in which all dualities, all forms emerge as formlessness. In Zen, it is the non-existence of yin and the yang. So, why is formlessness so difficult to comprehend? See, our understanding and learning is limited to ordered perceptions we already have in our psyche. So the ordered perceptions, it really is a sort of a relativity and connectivity with defined objects, defined modules, defined ideas. In other words, when something is as defined and as crisp, they are considered materiality in the spiritual schools. See, we want to understand God based on the belief system that we have already so systematically entrenched with. In other words, we want to understand God based on our own ordered perceptions. And with these perceptions, we fail to comprehend something as formless as God. And that is why we have among us atheists and agnostics and rationalists. Don't you think it is better to describe ourselves as limited simplicists? In the wisdom of God, that's exactly what we are. We are limited simplicists. See, God has all the choices in the universe, yet He decides to be formless. Holy Spirit is formless. Jesus says to Mary Magdalene after His resurrection, "Don't cling to me because I have not yet ascended to the Father." It means don't cling to my form. Instead, cling to my formlessness, since I became one in the formlessness of our Father in heaven. So what is formlessness? See, every religion talks about this. And it is about the layers, the 6 layers we need to transcend to get into the 7th layer of formlessness. Even in Christianity, Prophet Ezekiel talks about it in chapters 46 and 47. St. Teresa of Avila, who is a doctor of the Catholic Church, she talks about the 7 layers. And she has written extensively about it in her books. And a modern mystic, his name is Thomas Merton. He has written a book about the 7-story mountains. In other words, he spent a lot of time in the Far East. And here he is talking about the Mount Meru. And what is Mount Meru like? And what is beyond Mount Meru? That is the book, 7-story mountain, Thomas Merton. And he talks extensively about it. So, what we are doing in these 7 layers are actually 7 layers of consciousness. In my book, Supreme Realization, I talk extensively about the 7 layers of consciousness and how to transcend through each layer. So, in these 7 layers, and if we look at them as conscious layers, then the conscious layers, the transcendence through these layers will take us beyond the 6 layers into the 7th layer, and that is what the supreme realization is according to my book. That is the realization of formlessness. Formlessness is a field of the purest conscious energy in which there is no material entanglements or obstacles whatsoever. It is the infinite field of conscious energy. That's what Jesus talks about, the water that rises up to, gushes up to eternity. So this energy has no beginning nor end. It's eternal. It is free of any desires. It is free of any dualistic knowledge. It is free of all polarities. It is the purest oneness of being, which is absolutely formless. It is the mind of God. So, what is relevant to formlessness is not mindfulness. It is, in fact, mindlessness. In a simplistic way, it is mindfulness so abstract, it is mindlessness. It is the realm of infinite reality. See, in mathematics, when we talk about infinity, in the field of infinity, or in the number of infinity, constants or variables, nothing is significant. Even if it is in the billions and trillions, it's insignificant because we are dealing with infinity. So how we defined infinity with material numbers and variables and all of that, it no longer exists. It's insignificant. So the polarity-based consciousness, the polarity-based mind, the polarity-based intelligence and mindfulness needs to be transcended so that we could enter into the realm of mindlessness and formlessness. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We will discuss a lot about these subjects in the forthcoming videos, and I hope you will come back and listen to all of them. Thank you so much for listening. This is Anthony Nayagan.